I always knew my curiosity would get the better of me. As a millennial living in an era dominated by technology and information, it was easy to get lost in the endless flow of data and possibilities. But sometimes, what you find in the depths of your curiosity is not something you ever wanted to uncover. It began with a simple article on a niche blog I stumbled upon late one night. I had been reading about abandoned places, a hobby of mine, and this particular piece mentioned an old facility hidden deep in the forests of upstate New York. The author, writing under a pseudonym, claimed it was a top-secret government lab that had been shut down decades ago. Intrigued, I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few weeks, I scoured the internet for any mention of the facility. There were rumors and whispers, but nothing concrete. No official records, no news articles, just fragmented stories and urban legends. The more I read, the more obsessed I became. I needed to know if this place existed, and more importantly, what had happened there. I managed to piece together enough information to form a rough idea of where the facility might be located. Armed with a map and the coordinates I had painstakingly gathered, I decided to take a trip. I told myself it was just a weekend adventure, a chance to satisfy my curiosity and maybe get some good photos for my blog. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The drive upstate was uneventful. The autumn leaves were just beginning to change color, painting the landscape in shades of orange and red. As I drove deeper into the forest, the roads became narrower and less maintained. Eventually, I reached a point where my car could go no further. I parked by the side of the road, grabbed my backpack, and set off on foot. The forest was dense and eerily silent. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional rustle of wildlife. I followed the coordinates, using my GPS to guide me through the thick underbrush. After about an hour of hiking, I saw it. A chain-link fence, rusty and overgrown with vegetation. Beyond it, partially hidden by the trees, stood the facility. It was a sprawling complex of concrete and steel, surrounded by a tall perimeter fence topped with barbed wire. The buildings were in various states of decay, windows shattered, doors hanging off their hinges. There was an unnatural stillness about the place, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. I found a gap in the fence where it had been pulled back, probably by previous explorers. I slipped through and made my way towards the main building. The entrance was a heavy steel door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior was just as dilapidated as the exterior. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. I walked down a long corridor, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The place felt abandoned, but there was a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. It was as if the walls themselves were watching me. I explored the building for hours, finding old laboratories, offices, and storage rooms. Most of the equipment had been removed or destroyed, but I found a few scattered documents that hinted at the facility's purpose. It had been a research lab, focused on some kind of psychological experimentation. The details were vague, but the implications were chilling. As I delved deeper into the facility, I found a staircase leading to the lower levels. I hesitated for a moment before descending. The air grew colder and damper the further I went, and the darkness seemed to press in around me. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a heavy metal door. It was locked, but the rusted hinges gave way with a bit of effort. Beyond the door was a series of small, windowless rooms. The walls were lined with padded cells, each one containing a single rusted bed frame. The floor was stained with something dark and unidentifiable. I shuddered, trying to imagine what kind of experiments had been conducted here. In the last room, I found a small desk with a stack of files. The documents were yellowed with age, but still legible. They detailed a series of experiments on human subjects, referred to only by numbers. The experiments ranged from sleep deprivation to sensory deprivation to more extreme forms of psychological torture. My stomach churned as I read the descriptions, the cold, clinical language contrasting sharply with the horrific content. I took a few photos of the documents in the room, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. But as I turned to leave, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere deeper in the facility. I stood frozen, straining to hear. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. It sounded like someone was knocking on a door. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the noise. Maybe it was just the building settling, or an animal trapped somewhere. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound. The tapping grew louder as I made my way down another corridor, leading me to a heavy steel door at the end. The door was marked with a warning sign, "Authorized personnel only." The paint was faded, but the words were still clear. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room beyond was a large, open space filled with rows of cages. The cages were empty, but the sight of them sent a shiver down my spine. In the center of the room was a large glass tank, its contents obscured by a thick layer of grime. The tapping was coming from inside the tank. I approached cautiously, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I got closer, I could make out a shape inside the tank, a figure, hunched and motionless. I wiped away some of the grime with my sleeve, revealing a man inside. His skin was pale and his eyes were closed, but he was alive. The tapping was his fingers, drumming against the glass in a slow, rhythmic pattern. I recoiled in horror, stumbling back. The man opened his eyes, and for a moment, our gazes locked. There was a pleading look in his eyes, a silent cry for help. I wanted to help him, but I was paralyzed with fear. Before I could react, a voice behind me broke the silence. "Step away from the tank." I spun around to see a man standing in the doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit. His face was stern, his eyes cold and calculating. He held a gun pointed directly at me. "Who are you?" I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. "That doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you leave. Now." I glanced back at the man in the tank, then back at the stranger. "But now," he repeated, his voice brooking no argument. I raised my hands and backed away, my mind racing. The stranger kept the gun trained on me as he followed me out of the room and up the stairs. I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. When we reached the main entrance, he gave me a shove. "Go," he said, "and don't come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran out of the facility and into the forest, my heart racing. I didn't stop until I reached my car. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting the stranger to follow me. But the road remained empty. When I got home, I locked the doors and collapsed on the couch, trying to process what had just happened. The facility, the experiments, the man in the tank, it all seemed like a nightmare. But the photos on my phone were proof that it was real. I wanted to go to the authorities, to expose what I had found. But I knew that whoever was behind the facility had powerful connections. They wouldn't hesitate to silence me if I tried to blow the whistle. I decided to lay low, to keep my head down, and hope that they would leave me alone. But the nightmares continued. I couldn't shake the image of the man in the tank, his eyes pleading for help. I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, hearing whispers in the silence. I felt like I was being watched, followed. One night, I woke up to the sound of my front door opening. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept down the hallway, my heart pounding. The door was ajar, and a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was the man from the facility, the one who had pointed the gun at me. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said. "You need to understand what's at stake here." I tightened my grip on the bat. "Stay away from me." He held up his hands, a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to explain." Against my better judgment, I lowered the bat. "Explain what?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The facility, it was part of a government project. We were trying to develop new methods of psychological warfare. The experiments were designed to break people down, to see how far we could push them." I felt a surge of anger. "You tortured people." He nodded, his expression grim. "Yes, and it got out of hand. The project was shut down, and we were ordered to destroy all evidence. But some of the subjects, we couldn't just kill them. We put them in stasis, hoping that one day we might find a way to help them. And the man in the tank? He's one of the last. We didn't know what else to do with him." I shook my head, disgusted. "This is insane." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. But you need to understand, if you go public with this, you'll be putting yourself in danger. There are people who will do anything to keep this buried." I looked at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I need your help." "My help?" He nodded. "We want to shut the facility down for good, to release the remaining subjects and destroy the evidence. But we can't do it alone. We need someone on the outside to help us. I stared at him, torn between anger and fear. Why should I trust you? He sighed. You don't have to. But think about it. If you help us, you'll be ensuring that no one else ever goes through what those people did. You'll be making things right. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. I knew he was right. I couldn't just walk away from this. I had seen too much, but I also knew that helping him would put me in danger. Okay, I said finally. What do you need me to do? He smiled, a hint of relief in his eyes. We'll be in touch. Over the next few days, I received a series of encrypted messages with instructions. I was to gather as much information as I could about the facility and its remaining subjects. I spent hours poring over the documents and photos I had taken, piecing together the story of the experiments and the people who had suffered through them. It wasn't easy. The more I learned, the more horrified I became. The experiments had been brutal, designed to break people down mentally and physically. The subjects had been kept in isolation, deprived of sleep and food, subjected to constant psychological torment. Many had died, their bodies disposed of in unmarked graves, but a few had survived, kept in stasis in the hope that they might one day be rehabilitated. The man in the tank was one of them. His name was John, and he had been a soldier before being taken to the facility. The experiments had left him broken, his mind shattered by the things he had endured. I felt a deep sense of responsibility. These people had been through hell, and it was up to me to help them. I followed the instructions in the messages, gathering the information and preparing for the next step. Finally, the day came. I received a message with a set of coordinates and a time. I was to meet my contact at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I packed a bag with the documents and drove to the location, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The warehouse was a dark, sprawling structure, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. I parked my car and approached the entrance, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. I found my contact waiting for me, a man in his late 30s with a rugged, no-nonsense demeanor. He introduced himself as Jack and explained the plan. We were going to break into the facility, release the remaining subjects, and destroy the evidence. It was a risky plan, but I knew it was the right thing to do. We spent hours going over the details, preparing for every possible scenario. As night fell, we set out for the facility, our hearts pounding with adrenaline. The drive through the forest was tense and silent. When we reached the facility, we parked a short distance away and approached on foot. The perimeter fence was still there, rusted and overgrown with vegetation. We slipped through the gap and made our way to the main building. Jack had brought a set of lock-picking tools, and he quickly got us inside. The facility was just as I remembered, dark, cold, and silent. We moved through the corridors, our footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. When we reached the lower levels, we found the room with the cages and the glass tank. John was still inside, his fingers tapping against the glass. Jack worked quickly to release him, using a set of tools to disable the stasis mechanism. As the tank drained, John collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. I helped him to his feet, his body weak and trembling. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. We moved quickly, releasing the other subjects and gathering the evidence. Jack had brought a set of explosives, and we planted them throughout the facility, making sure to destroy every trace of the experiments. As we made our way back to the surface, I felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. We had done it. We had exposed the truth and set the victims free. But I knew it wasn't over. There would be consequences, and we would have to face them. We drove away from the facility, the explosives detonating behind us in a series of loud, thunderous booms. The night sky lit up with the glow of the flames, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But as we reached the city, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A black SUV following us, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. I knew it was them, the people behind the facility. They had found us. Jack and I exchanged a look, our hearts pounding with fear. We drove through the city, trying to lose the SUV in the maze of streets and alleys. But it stayed with us, relentless and determined. Finally, we reached a dead-end street and there was nowhere left to run. The SUV pulled up behind us, and a group of men in dark suits stepped out. They were armed, and their expressions were cold and merciless. Jack and I got out of the car, our hands raised in surrender. I felt a deep sense of dread, knowing that we were at their mercy. One of the men stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have meddled," he said. "You don't know what you're dealing with." I looked at him, my heart pounding with fear. "We had to stop you. What you were doing was wrong." He nodded, his expression unchanging. "Maybe, but now you have to face the consequences." I braced myself for the worst, but then something unexpected happened. A group of police cars pulled up, their sirens blaring. The men in suits looked startled, and for a moment there was a tense standoff. Then the police officers stepped out, their guns drawn. "Put your weapons down," one of them shouted. "You're under arrest." The men in suits hesitated, then slowly lowered their guns. The officers moved in, handcuffing them and leading them away. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, knowing that we were finally safe. As the officers took our statements, I realized that this was just the beginning. The truth about the facility would come out, and there would be an investigation. The people responsible would be brought to justice, and the victims would finally get the help they needed. But I also knew that the experience had changed me. I had seen the darkness that lurks beneath the surface, the evil that people are capable of. And I had learned that sometimes you have to stand up and fight, no matter the cost. In the end, I knew that we had done the right thing. We had exposed the truth and set things right, and for that I was grateful. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of peace. The nightmares would continue, and the memories would haunt me, but I knew that I had made a difference. And that was enough.